Hello, and welcome to a special edition of Up Close on METV. I'm Charles Clapsaddle, Station Manager for Manatee Educational Television, and it's our great privilege to have with us today Jennifer and Kyle from RedCon Solutions Group to talk about a very important matter that pertains to all of us, our security. Kyle, Jennifer, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time from your very busy schedule to talk about these critical issues as it pertains to personal safety. And Kyle, before we begin, could you give us a little background about what RedCon Solutions Group is and the services and resources that you provide?
Absolutely, Charles. First off, thank you for having us here. RedCon Solutions Group is a federal prime contractor in the security realm, and we also provide threat and risk assessment analysis as well to businesses, religious organizations, medical facilities, and schools as well.
Well, in this day and age, it's more important now than ever for us to have that kind of sense of awareness so we can have a safe environment around us. In the aftermath of the last few weeks, there's been shootings and tragedies throughout the country and throughout the world. It's really important for individuals, organizations, families to have that sense of awareness as they go out about their everyday activities.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And I think, the events over the last month to 2 months that have happened around the world, from Orlando to San Bernardino to France to active shooter situations in hospitals and whatnot, definitely have people in a heightened sense of awareness. We want people to be aware of their surroundings, but we don't want to create a fear of living in paranoia. So there's a fine line between, what can we do to keep ourselves safe? What can we do to keep our families safe? And then still being able to live and enjoy life.
And I think that's a key thing. One does not want to live in a perpetual state of anxiety, but at the same time, there's clear ways that one can protect themselves. And Jennifer, I'd like to ask you, if I may, how can you be prepared about having a plan? Where does that start? Does that start at the family level? Does that start at, as an individual? How do you begin to, formulate a safety plan?
Yeah, thanks, Charles, and thanks again for having us here as well. I think it definitely can start at home with a family. I mean, even down to little things like having a family safety word, where someone's knocking at the door and they're saying, oh, it's your uncle. And, if it's really your uncle, they would know kind of your family password and just something that simple, creating a plan like that. But I think, having any plan starts with awareness and understanding and just being observant, in any situation, and just not always expecting that, nothing could happen, and just kind of having the conversation.
Well, I think, and we were mentioning this before we started, Kyle, we talked about, this is different times now. One has to be very conscious of your surroundings. And, what are those key things that you would think, let's say that you're an individual, you're out with your family, perhaps at an amusement park or some kind of thing. What are those things that you would say to a family about being aware of the environment that you're in?
Well, I think anytime you get into a new environment that you're unaware of your surroundings or unaware of how your surroundings will evolve during your duration in that environment, I think you need to be very keen on your situational awareness. I think you need to know where your exits are. If in the event of an emergency, how are you going to get your family out of there safely and secure? And if you guys get separated, you need to have a checkpoint, and you say, okay, in the event of emergency, if we get separated, this is where we will meet upon, and then we will move forward from there.
I think that's a really important point. And this kind of relates to, environments that you're unfamiliar with. Let's say that you go to a club or a restaurant or someplace. It would seem to me that when you walk in there, it's a welcoming, inviting environment, but you should be aware how you can get out of that environment, if there was, some kind of situation.
Absolutely. You want to be able to have an escape plan. You never want to feel like you're trapped, And then also in the event of a club or businesses or venues and stuff like that, it's also the responsibility of the business owner to ensure that patrons who come into your environment who expect to have a good time, they can do so knowing that, someone has their back, knowing that someone is screening people coming in the door, knowing that they're not allowing entry in unsupervised locations, in exit doors, just ensuring that we're doing everything that we can as business owners to ensure that our patrons are safe and able to have a good time.
And I think that's a really excellent point. If you go into a place and there's music or it's a darkened area, well, maybe it's in the best interest of you to see where those fire exits are, yes, or those places that one can leave from in the event that there was something. Jennifer, I'd like to take a moment, if I may, and talk about the scope of things that that RedCon is involved in, because you have so many different areas of focus that you concentrate. You work with the school district. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have a contract with Manatee County School District for temporary staffing services. RedCon is really focused in 3 core areas. One of those is professional services, which, for example, would be the work that we're doing with Manatee County. And that's for professional services for staff augmentation, for temporary staff personnel. So that's an area of our business. And the second area would be security services, which is kind of the focus of our conversation here today. We can provide unarmed and armed security officers to various entities, whether it be to an organization, a company, a large-scale event. We also do training, so some of the points that Kyle will talk about in relation to safety and security response, right, and things like that, that's a service our company can provide. And then the third area is facilities maintenance and management. So anything.
So it's a wide variety of different things that you and Kyle and your staff have expertise and knowledge of that you can provide to a wide variety of different organizations.
Yep, that's right. And we're a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business, and we really take pride in creating customized solutions for the entities that we work with and try to keep that relationship very personal and hands-on. And
I think one of the key things, too, is that, in this day and age, as we just talked about, it's really important to have that kind of a sense of awareness, throughout, whether it's a business, a small business, a large business, or even your family, and for individuals as well. And I must point out, if I may, that Kyle, you're a veteran. You served with the United States Army.
I did.
Tell us a little bit about your background in the Army.
I served just shy of 8 years in the United States Army, 2 tours in Iraq. Unfortunately, I was wounded in combat by an improvised explosive device midway through my 2nd tour, which resulted in me being retired from the Army at a fairly young age. But I still wanted to be able to continue my service and serve in a different capacity. And so now what I've done is just focus our mission on, how can we keep our communities safe and our businesses safe? And this is the best way we can think to do it.
Well, and it's an excellent way, too. And, I must point out, we want to thank you for your service to the country.
Thank you.
But one of the things that I'd like for us to have that kind of conversation about, and I think Kyle touched on it, how do we learn awareness? These are different times we live in. We go to places, whether it's a ball game or to a club, we have that sense of security. And sometimes that's not always a good thing to have. We have to be aware. But how do we start instilling that awareness, perhaps even at a very young age? Kyle, what do you think?
Well, I think, from a very young age, especially within the educational system and especially where we live in Florida, we are always preparing ourselves for disasters. We're doing fire drills. We are doing hurricane drills. You know, we have checklists of things to do in the event of a natural disaster, of a storm. You know, what are we going to do in the event that the power goes out for 2 days? Well, I think we need to take that same mentality. And now also, what are we going to do to keep our families safe if we're caught in the event of an active shooter, you know, or if we're caught in just an event of a terrorist attack?
Right.
I think we can clearly see by the events in Nice, you know, where 3 generations of people were killed, you know, that it does not discriminate, and you just never know when or where. So I think if you have a baseline for training and awareness, then you will have that much more of the ability to stay alive, you know, to survive.
And that's an excellent point too. I mean, it's not just for individuals. You know, it's for all ages. You know, for young children, I think should have that constant sense of a heightened awareness that how can I protect myself? How can parents look out for their children? As a senior, and I understand during that Nice attack there were many seniors that unfortunately couldn't escape from the onslaught. You know, how do you prepare for that thing? But it goes more than this. It really has to start on kind of everyday activities. If you go to the store, if you go to a hospital, you have to be aware of your environment.
Absolutely, and if you work in a hospital, if you work in a hospital and your job is to protect the patients, and you find yourself in the middle of a situation, you know, do you have the training? Is it second nature? You know, is it your instinct that you know what to do to survive in the event of imminent danger?
And Jennifer, you had a comment?
Yeah, you know, I heard this a long time ago that when you don't have a plan, you plan to fail. And, something that I've always done is, I kind of cater what I take with me where I go, because I think ahead, where am I going? What environment am I going to be in? What steps do I have to take to ensure my safety? Going to a club, especially being a woman, putting yourself in an environment like that, a very busy, kind of chaotic by nature, what steps can I take before I even leave home to help ensure my safety? Sometimes it means, I make sure when I leave and I get to my car, I have my keys out, or, just something that's very, very simple, but a lot of people don't tend to think that way. You don't want to be standing at your car in the middle of the night digging in your bag. You're not able to look around and see what's happening around you. You want to, again, be prepared. And that's something before you even leave the house that you can kind of go through a checklist in your mind. Where am I going? What do I need? How can I take those extra steps just to, again, be aware, create the plan, and help ensure your own safety by taking it, the responsibility on yourself.
And, I think that's an excellent point. And when you think about it, well, these are relatively, reasonable type of preventive type of measures that one can take, very common sense type of thing. But people don't always think about that because they don't think that there's a danger or a potential danger to them.
Yeah, and one thing I think that's huge, prior to taking my position with RedCon, I was working for Enterprise Florida, the state of Florida's economic development agency, and I did a lot of international travel. My job was helping develop international business, and so I would find myself in these different environments, and sometimes it would be, at a trade show with hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world, and I would always have to kind of think, how do I look out for myself?
Right.
I'm in a strange city, I'm around a lot of people, and I think that, something that I notice a lot of other people doing that attracts a lot of liability to them is their phones. People walk around looking down on their cell phone. They're not looking up. They're not seeing what's going on. Just something so simple like that really kind of puts yourself at a risk of somebody, pickpocketing you or taking advantage of you. Put yourself in a vulnerable place with that. Something else, again, small, simple thing, especially for women. I'm a bag lady. I carry a purse everywhere I go. It's got a lot of stuff in it. But I make sure when I travel, I take a small bag. I carry it over my shoulder. I put it on the front of my person and make sure it has a zipper. So again, I'm just, I'm minimizing my risk. And back to the plan, I planned that before I left. I thought it through. And I think that's just simple steps that people can take, at a young age before they leave the house.
Very much so. And I think those are kind of key and critical type of things that one would think, oh yes, why didn't I think of that? But, people don't.
Yeah.
People don't. And as for the phone, people don't. You can look anywhere. People are engaged with their phone. That's a constant sense of a thing. But maybe people need to remove themselves from that when they're in an environment where there might be issues about their safety.
Yeah, or even that, a lot of times our phones show our location, or we're updating that, we're not home, we're leaving on vacation, just little things that people can, just be a little more mindful of what you're putting out there.
And I think those are really important. And I think from a women's perspective too, is that, women, need to be perhaps a little bit more sensitive to their surroundings as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a critical thing. Bag, watch your phone, have your key. Parking in an area that's perhaps well lit, maybe travel in a group. But those are kind of the type of things that one would think of as having those common sense type of things.
Yeah.
But Kyle, I want to go back to you for what kind of training do you think that individuals or organizations, what kind of training would you suggest that people start thinking about? To sharpen those skills, that those awareness skills.
Well, I think one, we have to train as we're in the middle of something. We have to train. In the military, we had a term: you train as you fight. And that means that every training that you had, you took serious. Every training that you had, you followed it step by step, so that it became second nature. And there you lost your sense of complacency,
right,
and you raised your sense of situational awareness. So that way, if you were ever caught, and heaven forbid that you are, but if you were ever caught, then you have that second nature training to fall back on, and your chances of survivability increase dramatically because you're not thinking, you're just executing.
Right.
And that's what I think it comes down to. I think, over the past 10 years or so, society has gotten very complacent. Really after 9/11, everybody kind of raised their sense of heightened awareness from traveling, right, to, just how they live their everyday life. And I think now over the past few years, we've kind of dropped our guard a little bit, and it's showing. It's showing in the sense that, there are people out there that still want to hurt us, that still want to bring us harm, and we have to know, what do we do in those situations? How do I protect my family? We have a little boy as well, and so what can we do to ensure that as he grows up, he understands, if he's caught in a situation at school, what does he do? Exactly. Or if he's caught in a situation anywhere, he knows that, there are certain things that he needs to do to try and keep himself safe. And I don't think that you can be too young to start teaching that.
And and I think you're exactly right. When you're talking about hurricane drills, fire drills, and Jennifer, you were talking about this earlier, and that's exactly right. We're prepared for that. We know that if there's a fire, where the fire exits are. Yeah. There's a dangerous situation. What was it? Stop, drop, and roll.
Yeah.
That's kind of ingrained into us at a young age. So perhaps, this kind of awareness needs to start, at a younger ages. So by the time one reaches adulthood, you kind of have that sense of, I know what to do in a situation. And that's critical, I think.
Absolutely.
But, a lot of people, and this is, I think, something that we need to take a few minutes to talk about, is that, everybody goes to their job, some work in big corporations, some work in small businesses, and it really, as you mentioned, Kyle, it's really important for those businesses, those organizations, to have a safety plan as well.
Yeah.
And it's really incumbent upon them because they want to protect their employees. So tell us a little bit about what you think, why it's a great responsibility for businesses and organizations to have that safety plan.
Well, as a business owner myself, my employees are my biggest assets, and I owe it to them every time that they step on within the parameters of our employment, to keep them safe and to provide them the tools that they need so that at the end of the day they can pack up and go back home to their family. And just like, when you go into a building and you see a fire escape plan, on the wall, then, we also have to have a safety plan in the event of immediate danger. How do we best get out of here?
Right.
And survival tips for active shooter are the 4 A's, situational awareness, just being aware of your surroundings, arming yourself, avoidance, You know, and that doesn't necessarily mean arm yourself with a concealed weapon. It means arm yourself with anything that you can get your hands on.
Help
you know,
protect
to
yourself.
to avoid, exactly. And then the last one is attack. You know, if you can't run, you know, and you can't avoid, then you arm yourself and you attack and you fight for your life. You know, and that's what employers have to ensure that their employees understand. Educators have to ensure that their teachers understand. You know, that in the event of an issue in a classroom, you know, is that teacher trained in order to keep them kids safe?
Right.
Because that's their primary responsibility.
And I think that's a critical thing. And I think that, you know, within schools, whether it's, you know, elementary or middle or high school, and even within colleges and universities, there has to be, you know, that kind of training and at the same time awareness of how best to protect the charges that you have.
Yeah.
And one of the things, you know, just recently, you know, I mean, you know, talking about a situation, I believe it happened in Titusville, where a gunman walked into a hospital at random, shot a couple of people, and then fortunately was apprehended by security personnel on scene. But those are the kind of things that happen, and within a hospital, one would think, with all these vulnerable population, much like a school, is that you wouldn't have to have some kind of coherent plan what would happen if you do have an active shooter.
I agree completely. You know, we have to set parameters from the time that an individual enters our building or our facility. You know, we have to ensure that the people that work in that facility, that individual coming in there is not armed. You know, especially for vulnerable people, like you said, within hospitals, within schools. You know, we need to have checks at the door. There has to be accountability to say that you can't just walk into a hospital with a firearm. You can't, because there's not enough people there to protect themselves because nobody else is armed there.
That's true.
You know, and so we have to stop things like that from happening.
Well, and I think that's a critical thing. And now RedCon can help with those kind of like assessments for businesses and organizations.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Because I think, you know, there's a lot of businesses, you know, with, you know, many employees, some is, you know, 10, 20 employees. One would think that, you know, each organization, much like they have a plan in case of a fire or a hurricane or an act of God, one would want to have a plan in place. In the event this happens, here's what we can do. And every organization, I would think, would probably like to have one.
And I think it's about bringing the education. You know, sitting your employees down and training them and providing the tools and the resources that they need to be successful in the event. That way, you know, you're able to control your own destiny in a sense. You know, you have the tools, and if everybody has the tools and if everybody works together, then there's a much higher sense of survivability.
Right.
You always hear about there's always more casualties because someone is always trying to rescue someone else. Someone is always trying to go back in and help someone who doesn't necessarily know what to do because it's not second nature. And if we can get to a point where it's absolutely second nature, then, you know, we have a higher chance of survivability. Things are going to happen. There are bad people out there that want to see us hurt. There are people out there that want to do us harm. You know, so we have to do whatever we can to ensure that, one, we don't allow them, and two, if they do succeed, how do we best survive?
Right. And you know, I must point out, you know, the first responders, whether it's law enforcement or fire or EMS, I mean, they're going to be there. They're going to respond. They're going to help in the quickest, fastest way possible. But it's not going to be immediate. So there's a certain responsibility that employers and individuals have to create a perfect environment. You know that law enforcement is coming in the event of something. You know that. But what that time period is indeterminate. You know, it might be minutes, it might be 10 minutes, whatever the case might be. And in that time, your employer, your organization, you as an individual have a great responsibility to yourself and to your family, you know, to protect yourself.
In the event of a disaster situation like that, you know, for instance, active shooter, most active shooter situations are over after 90 seconds. You know, it takes anywhere between 90 and 160 seconds to get your first responder on the ground there. You have precious seconds that you're losing waiting on law enforcement. You know, they will be there. You know, they do tremendous great things. But we also have to take some of it accountability for ourselves and ensure that we know what to do as well in the event of an emergency.
And I think that's a wonderful point. Now, Jennifer, I want to come back to you for a minute. aside from your work with Enterprise Florida, which took you all over, the world doing different things, I mean, you traveled throughout the country a lot. This being the peak of summer, people are traveling. They're going on vacation, they're going on business trips, they're doing a lot of different things. And you mentioned briefly a little bit about how one can protect yourself. What are those other issues that you think people should know about when they're traveling, whether internationally or nationally or whether in their vehicle?
Well, I think when you're traveling where you're going, through an airport and that, the kind of that route of travel, less is more, because you want to keep yourself kind of free of tons of bags and things like that. You want to keep your arms and your kind of person accessible, so that, in the unlikely event, again, if something were to happen, you don't have that hesitation of, I got to take my stuff with me, or, you've got to take 20 bags off of you, or things like that. And, I think that, again, having, especially again for women, over the shoulder purse, keep it on the front of you. I mean, I have those big bags that open up and I just throw everything I can into them, but it leaves my bag open in the back and I don't always see what's going on behind me. I think kind of, again, keeping things closed. And I think that keeping your identification separate for international travel, so you have your passport secured in one location, maybe you have your driver's license in your pocket. You're not keeping everything, so then again, in the unlikely event that something were to happen, you haven't lost all of your valuables in one place.
And I think that's an excellent point too. I mean, traveling, people overpack, they put stuff in here, they have this, and it makes you much more vulnerable a target, I would think. If you're loaded down with 3 or 4 bags, it kind of takes your focus away from where it should be.
That's the biggest thing. It's just adding distraction, again, and being on your phone, allowing your travel documents to be visible, where you've gotten, you're just kind of keeping these important pieces of paper out and visible to other people, kind of try to keep it private. Money is another thing. A lot of times, when people travel, they take cash with them. Don't pull out large amounts of money where it's visible, especially with the larger bills on the outside of the stack of money. Maybe put the dollar bills on the outside and the higher bills on the inside, and keep it, as discreet as possible.
That's a great little travel tip for people to realize.
Very simple things. It's having a plan. It's thinking ahead. Keeping yourself safe is not rocket scientist. It's just a matter of being aware and
kind of sharpening up those skills and those awareness that you already have. But one thing occurred to me, and I want to pose this question to Kyle, if I may, as Jennifer was talking. You have to be aware of your surroundings. If you see something that looks out of place, out of the norm, or in some way suspicious, you kind of have an obligation to say something or to talk, or to report that. I just saw this. There's a lot of incidents that I would think have occurred that somebody saw something, but they didn't think to say anything about it. Whether it's somebody walking down the street with a bag that looks suspicious or something protruding out of their backpack. It's important if you see something suspicious, whether you're in an everyday kind of working environment or if you're traveling, to say something.
I think, over the past few years, especially as social media has really just evolved, that people get in their bubble. We too often get in our own little bubble, and we get this mentality that, if I just stay in my bubble and don't look at anyone or don't say anything, I can just go on and do my thing during the day. But that mentality is not working. We have to work together. We have to step outside of our bubble. If we see an unattended bag, if we feel someone is following us, if we see something that just does not look right, it's better to go with your gut instinct anytime, and say something. And the worst that happens is it's checked out and it amounts to nothing, but it could be checked out and it could really be something, and you might have saved a disaster. I think we have to get outside of our bubble, and we have to keep an eye on each other as well.
And I think that's an excellent point, Kyle, and very, very well said, is that, we have to be aware not only of our little environment, but also how that might affect everybody else around us as well. So, and I think that's a really well point, outside of the bubble.
Absolutely.
I like that a lot. One thing I want to get back to Jennifer on, because first of all, She's giving some excellent tips
She
here.
is. She is.
But one of the things, let's talk about the home for a minute. These excellent tips about, traveling, keeping that, and as a woman. But, let's talk about home environment. What are those kind of things that you would suggest are important for a home environment? You're a woman, you're coming home from work, you've got the groceries in one hand, you've got maybe your children in the other. What are those kind of things that, as a homeowner, that you have to be aware of?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that a lot of times when we're at home and we're in the house, we don't think that there's additional things that we can do to kind of make our home and ourselves a little bit safer, but there are. I find myself sometimes when we're in the house, the front door is unlocked. I think that, when you're at home and everyone's in the house, there's really no reason for your door to be unlocked. Keep it locked, keep it secured.
That's a good point.
I think, I used to be the person that I don't want to make 2 trips from the car and, I want to take all my groceries and be all bogged down with all these bags everywhere. But that's not really the safest thing to do because, again, you're distracted. It's really not necessary. Take your time so you can still kind of be looking around your neighborhood, just be aware of what's going on.
Very much so. Yeah.
Just kind of, again, take your time so that you can create that awareness. There's things that you can get to put in your home that you can just pick up at, a local department store, a home, like a Home Depot or Lowe's. Or,
right.
They have kind of these sticks, I guess like a metal, I don't know what they're called. They're like a door stopper. And you can... Yeah, and so you can put that on the door. I've lived in apartments for many years, and those came in handy because I was a single woman living alone, and I put that on the door. And even if someone were to open the door, they can't get through. The door just
it gives you that added sense of security.
Exactly, which also allows for more time in the unlikely event something were to happen. No one's just going to walk in. I'm going to hear the door. I'm going to hear something. It gives me a little bit more time to react. Same thing with the locks, the chain locks on the door. It gives people a little bit more time to react. We can't always rely on home alarm systems. Electricity goes out, things like that.
That's true.
So it's good to have those backup plans. You could also get, a piece of wooden, like a wooden pipe and put it in windows. It jams the window.
That's true.
There's a lot of little things people neglect to do. You leave your garage door open.
Right.
If you're at home and the kids aren't playing outside, shut your garage door. Don't allow other people that are in your neighborhood that maybe...
That's a very good point.
They see what's in there.
That's a very good point. And I would suggest to you, and I think you kind of hit the nail right on the head, is, people look for targets of opportunity. They look for vulnerable people and vulnerable situations that they can take advantage of, whether that's on a terrorist level or a thief or a robber. They look for that kind of... If you are less vulnerable, one will look for another target, or 2 will just leave the area entirely. Would you agree with that?
Those are called soft targets. And soft targets are people or situations that are very vulnerable to an attack. I think another thing is you get to know your neighbors. Get to know your neighbors, and so that you guys can help each other. If they're out of town or if they're at work and you notice suspicious activity or, solicitors or different things like that, especially if your neighbors are elderly or young, we have a responsibility as a community to keep each other safe. And I think by getting to know your neighbors and their surroundings as well, you guys can kind of help each other.
I think that's another excellent point. That's getting outside of that bubble again, perhaps, and doing that. But one of the things that I wanted to talk to both of you about, everybody travels. Everybody gets in their car and they'll go to, you guys came all the way from Orlando this morning, and we deeply appreciate that. But everybody's in their car. They travel. People, go different places at different times of the day, and you're in your car a lot. If you're traveling, what are some of those key things in your vehicle? What are some of those key things that you think everyone should have to help them in the case of an emergency or in case of something happening to them?
I think a flashlight is very important.
Critical.
Again, even if something as simple as a flat tire or anything, it just helps. It helps to have that there. in those unlikely events. I think having, I like to keep, a pepper spray in my car, so I have, kind of a safety device I can use. If I am stranded for some reason, I've got something there that I can use to protect myself. I think having your doors locked, again, when you're in the car, especially when you're driving in a city, environment. I think, again, if you're in the car, keep your car secure, there's no need to really drive around with your doors unlocked. I think that there's a lot of things that you can do to kind of increase your security just by doing that.
I think that, that's an excellent point. Kyle, you had something?
Absolutely, and I think also, if you're a concealed weapon holder, and then be familiar with your weapon, know how to use it, practice, go to the range, become
responsible.
Exactly, just protect yourself, put yourself in a position to where you can be safe.
And I think that's an excellent point too. Is that if you are protecting your home and you're with your weapon and you're a licensed gun owner, it is important. It is critical for you to be well trained and knowledgeable about the weapon that's in your home. In the event that one has to use it, one has to be, you can't think, well, where are the instructions for this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, how do I do this or whatever?
Exactly.
One has to be very knowledgeable about how to use that in case of an emergency.
Exactly. Gun ownership is a huge responsibility.
It is.
And it's imperative that we take that very seriously. I just read in the newspaper yesterday morning about an 8-year-old boy in Orlando who accidentally shot himself with his grandparents' weapon. So in instances like that, gun ownership is a right that everyone has. If you're certified and if you've been through the instruction that trainers train you to handle weapons responsibly and effectively, but also at home you have to store it.
Exactly.
You have to store it somewhere
Exactly.
safe so that your children can't get to it, and then you have another disaster on your hands.
Those are the kind of tragedies that happen, and that's not responsible gun ownership.
Those are preventable tragedies.
And very much so. We're kind of winding down a little bit, Kyle and Jennifer. And, first of all, I find that this conversation is very important. After the aftermath of what happened in Baton Rouge and Dallas and in Nice and throughout the country in San Bernardino, those are terrible tragedies, and it puts people in a state of anxiety, and it's very stressful for people to think, well, that could happen here. The tragedy in Orlando, hit home since you live in Orlando, and what a terrible tragedy that was. But creating a sense of awareness, creating your own sense of security is a critical mission for everyone to be involved in. And it has to be, as you mentioned, you don't want to live in fear, but at the same time, you want to be cognizant of your surroundings. You want to be knowledgeable about how to get out of a circumstance, God forbid there is one, and you want to be protective of your family and your loved ones. So in kind of summing that up, these are critical things. And in future programs, because you're going to be developing a program about, awareness and security and issues there, tell us a little bit about some of the ideas that you have for some of your future programs.
Well, I think, for instance, you take the tragic incident that happened in Orlando with the Pulse shooting, and you have large groups of friends, male and female both, who get together and who congregate at clubs. And I think if you would just take 30 seconds before you go in the door and you say, okay, we're going to go in and we're going to have fun and we're going to have a good time and nothing's going to happen. But in the event that something does happen, this is where we'll come back and meet up at. There were stories on the news for days after where people who went to this venue with friends and they couldn't find them, whether they were deceased or whether they were injured or whether they just escaped and lost communication. You have to have a checkpoint, you have to have a reconvene point. And I think in some of our future programming, what we'll discuss is some of that, what can you do if you go to a large scale event, what can you do in the event of an emergency and to keep yourself safe. Also, we're going to discuss, how to best survive in an active shooter situation.
And I think that's an important thing.
I agree.
Again, we don't want to excuse me, create like that anxiety or stress. But these are kind of the critical skills that need to be developed in this day and time, in this age, and I think that's going to happen. But Jennifer, what are some of the ideas that you want to bring to the future programs?
I think, again, just to touch on keep it simple, simple tips and simple things that you can do to teach your family good safety practice, things that I think there, can be a whole program just devoted to family safety and kind of creating that family plan. But I think, the biggest thing I would like viewers to take away from today is it's time to start having the conversation.
I agree.
It's just, that's the biggest thing is, a lot of times people don't want to acknowledge what they fear, or, they're just like, oh, forget about it, or that won't happen to me.
That's very true.
And it probably won't happen to you. But I think it's time to say, okay, if something were to happen, what do I need to do?
Right.
Yeah.
And those are important. And I think, and I would suggest that perhaps in future programs you can continue to bring those little hints and safety tips, because, they're very good. And as for having the big bag and everybody putting things like that, that's an important factor. My wife is getting ready for a trip to Italy, and she's getting all these bags, and I'm saying, maybe you don't need all of that.
You don't.
Just think smaller. So that's a critical type of safety type of thing for her to take in mind. But one of the things that I'd like, and we talked about this in the future, is especially for young people. Young people are very vulnerable. They're vulnerable, in their neighborhoods. They're vulnerable at schools. They're vulnerable, at parks and things. So hopefully, among all the many things that you're going to be talking about, is those safety tips for young people, for families to kind of impart to their children, but also for children to take to mind how they best can, protect themselves from a wide variety of things.
Yeah.
So that might be, an interesting side project for you. But, we only have a few minutes left, and I want to talk a little bit more about organizations and businesses. What can a security service for your company provide, and how can you, training yourself and others, help minimize incidents? How can that, how do you set up a policy? Is there going to be a procedural manual that you have to go through? How best can you go to a company, for example, Jennifer, and say, we're going to assess your environment. We're going to look at, your egress opportunities, and then we're going to start training your individual. Is that something RedCon does?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, assess is the key word there. Every business is different. And so I think, first for us to get in there and kind of understand, what does your business do? How do you operate? What are the risks that your business may incur just in terms of traffic that comes in and out of the door, or, employees and how they might, love their job or hate their job, and what kind of situations might arise from that. I mean, I think it can be, very simple changes. For example, I went to a movie while I was up in Maryland, and, they had a big sign, we have the right to refuse service if you bring in a bag that we think is too large. That's a very simple procedure a company could put in place after our team comes in and says, maybe it's not a good idea. It's not necessary for people to bring that type of equipment into your facility.
Right.
That could be a recommendation that we come and we provide. But again, based on the location, based on the employees, based on the type of work, we would make recommendations for, like Kyle mentioned, active shooter response, exit plans.
Those key critical things that all organizations should have at some kind of indication that they can do something.
Yeah.
Well, Kyle, what do you think? What do you think are those things that organizations, individuals, what are those key things that everybody should be paying attention to? Whether you're out on the street, whether you're at a club, whether you're at a ball game, what are those things that you need individuals to be aware of when they're out and about? If you see something, say something.
Charles, I think we just need people to just go with their conscience. If they have an eerie feeling that something isn't right, regardless if it is or not, just bring it up. Just find someone to report it to, call your local authority, call someone who can come in and assess the situation to determine what the level of threat is. Jennifer really hit it on the head. It's, every situation is different, every entity is different, every organization is different, they operate different. But we have an obligation I have an obligation to my employees to ensure that when they come to work, they are kept safe. Regardless of the environment, it is my job to ensure that they are able to go home to their families at the end of the day. And I think that every business owner in Manatee County would also agree that their employees are their best assets. And so I think that we really have to take care of our people.
And that's an excellent point.
Jennifer. I was just going to add, there's one tactic for large companies that I think would be beneficial for companies, and this is one I think we would recommend, is kind of, a lot of times people aren't necessarily by their phone. You don't have a PA system to announce to everybody, danger, there's a problem. But sometimes, a company can code a certain email that they can just send out to the entire company and have that email. Like, this email is the code for, evacuate the building, or lock yourself in the office because there's a threat, or go to the evacuation plan, and just kind of almost like a silent alarm that notifies personnel.
And I think that's a great point. PA systems probably anything but an email or a text or a Twitter,
something that they can get out quickly and
is an immediate response. And those are kind of the key things that businesses and organizations should be thinking about to do it. Well, unfortunately, we're kind of out of time today, and I just want to give each one of you an opportunity to kind of sum up a little bit. And Jennifer, we'll start with you. First of all, again, thank you for taking the time to do this and for giving that kind of insight, that we all need about the safety and security. And I don't want you to speak for all women, but as a woman, what are those key things that you want women to understand about the safety, not only of themselves, but for their families?
I think the biggest thing is to think ahead, create a plan. When you go out for the day, a lot of times you'll pack a bag of things that you need for that day because you've thought through everything you have to do. I think add safety into that plan. Think about where you're going, what you're doing, what can you take, how can you respond, kind of before you even leave the house. So my biggest thing is plan and accept in your mind that although extremely unlikely something is going to happen, what would you do if? What's your own personal evacuation plan? And I think that you'll just find yourself more aware of all of your surroundings if you just kind of allow your mind to just think it through before you even leave the house.
And that's an excellent point. And I'm really looking forward to having you and Kyle back and talk about in detail as you host the program and for future episodes of how people can protect themselves, those wider issues as well. And Kyle, I'm going to give you the last word on this, if I may. First of all, again, I want to thank you for your service to our country. And thank you for taking the time out of what I know is a very busy schedule to talk about this and kind of, kick off, additional programs in the future. But this, as we said, and you've so eloquently put, these are different times. These are times that one has to be aware of. One has to change that mind thinking of what do we do now. You've got to start at an early age and develop those kind of sense of awareness. But at the same time, be outside of the little bubble, as you so eloquently put. So what are those key things that you want to leave people with today?
I think number one, as a society, Charles, we have to increase our situational awareness. We just have to become more aware of our surroundings and build off of that. I think that, as a community, if we start to keep an eye on one another, and start to help each other out, and if you see something, say something, and then we have to start training. We have to train our kids. We have to train our elderly. We have to train our educators. We have to train our hospital staff. We have to train people who are in the position of overseeing a large group of people, in the event of a disaster or a terrorist situation or whatever it may be, a disruptive employee or a disruptive patient. What can we do to ensure that there's not collateral damage? What can we do to ensure that there aren't mass casualties?
And very, very well put. First of all, we're looking forward to your next programming. We'll feature you and Jennifer and talking about the issues that you feel are important for this community to know about. I can't thank you both enough for doing this and for sharing your knowledge and expertise about something that's critical for all of the people in our community, for young, old, black, white, whoever the case might be. This is important for everyone. And again, Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you,
you.
Kyle,
Thank you.
for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on this special edition of Up Close on METV. A special thanks to Jennifer Evans and Kyle Evans from RedCon Solutions Group for sharing their knowledge and expertise about how we can stay safe. We look forward to seeing you next time on Up Close on METV.